Welcome to A Week in France, our Saturday roundup of French news. This is our first edition after the summer holiday, and it comes as France is gearing up for the back-to-school fall period known as the rentrée, a time of new beginnings, but with France still yet to get a new government. Nearly 2 months after snap parliamentary elections essentially led to a three-way tie between the left-wing, center-right, and far-right blocs, the country remains in political deadlock. Despite the left having the largest group, Emmanuel Macron rejected their Prime Minister candidate, Lucie Castet, and has continued consultations to come up with an alternative. Well, to talk through it all, I'm joined by Andrew Knapp, Emeritus Professor of French Politics and Contemporary History at the University of Reading. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good afternoon.
Now, Emmanuel Macron has no legal deadline to name a new prime minister. Do you think he's intentionally dragging this out? And if so, why would that be?
Well, if you look at the arithmetic, even with the best will in the world, let's be nice to Macron for a moment, even with the best will in the world, he's got a very tough job on his hands. If you look at the left, first of all, there are 577 seats in the National Assembly. If you look at the left, they've got 193 of them. That means they would need about nearly 100 more to get a majority. Then if you look at Macron's people, there's three groupings that together make up his supporters at the center of the political spectrum. They've got fewer. They've got 166 seats. So they would need well over 100. They'd need over 120 from somewhere to win a majority. Even if they teamed up with the moderate right, well, the moderate right only have 47 seats, so centre plus moderate right, you've only got 213. That's still way short of a majority. And then if you look finally at the far right and its friends, well, they've got 142, so they are about 100. They'd have to double that, and rather more than double that, to win a majority. Then there are a few wild cards. There are people from the overseas départements and territories who make up about 29 altogether. So that really making up a majority out of those disparate groupings is bound to be very difficult, especially as so far no one's in the parliamentary groupings has really budged and said, well, we'd be happy to make up a coalition with X or with Y. We think we have some elements of their program which we can share. Macron's people were indeed defeated in the parliamentary elections. They lost a lot of seats, but they remain very important simply because they are at the center of the political spectrum. It seems to me very, very hard indeed to imagine any sort of governing majority that doesn't include a chunk of the Macron people. So there we are for the moment. I don't think Macron has made his life very much easier by saying, well, the far left, the France Unbowed, La France Insoumise grouping, 72 parliamentarians, notionally led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, very shouty far-left politician. Macron has sort of practically ruled them out of the spectrum of acceptable Republican partners. And that, I think, he could have avoided. He didn't have to do that. But even without that gesture, he's got a very hard job on his hands. And it is, I'm bound to say, a dangerous situation. I know that a while ago, people made fun of the Belgians because they didn't have a government for 6 months. But Belgium is a federal state, so that a lot of the work actually is done by the different components of the federation. Whereas France is very much a centralized state, and it's got significant problems at the moment. It's got serious unrest in New Caledonia, and it's got to put together a budget which is likely to be a very unpopular budget because at the moment, they're running a deficit of about 5% of GDP. In itself, that's a bit dangerous, and it's certainly unacceptable to the European Union. So that even a government with a stable majority would have difficulty putting together a budget that doesn't bring people out on the streets or cause serious discontent to its voters.
Yeah, I do want to talk more about the consequences of this situation, because the polling institute Ipsos released a study this week on the impact Macron's calling for snap elections has had on the French public. They found that 67% of respondents believe his decision has had a negative effect on France. Do you think all of this, what kind of consequences, rather, do you think all of this is going to have on voters' very faith in France's electoral and governing systems?
Well, successive polls have also showed a significant minority, I think around 35% or so, saying what France really needs is a strong leader who doesn't need to bother about parliaments or elections or democracy or any of that stuff. I would be surprised if that number had not grown over the course of the summer, because this is just the sort of deadlock that enhances a sense of a plague on all their houses among voters who are not interested in and exasperated in politics. This is therefore going to be rather good for the far right, which has spent the summer being almost invisible, but I suspect will be racking up support in polls and eventually in elections to come. So, and I think the far right is considerably more dangerous than the far left. The far right would like to suspend a lot of the checks and balances in the French governmental system at the moment. It's no friend of the Constitutional Council. It's no friend of the European Court of Human Rights. It's no friend of the public sector broadcasting system. So that I think once you throw away democracy, or once you hand power over to the far right, there's no immediate prospect of that at the moment, it's going to be quite hard to get it back. So I think the consequences are potentially very negative, and a lot of people are now disconcerted, disenchanted with the workings of French democracy.
Yeah, it certainly is a tricky and dangerous situation. Yeah. Now, despite the divisive political situation, though, a spirit of unity and sportsmanship could return to France, at least temporarily, because the Paralympic Games opened this week in Paris. Now, Wednesday's opening ceremony saw over 4,000 athletes parade down the Champs-Élysées to Place de la Concorde. Hundreds of artists with and without disabilities danced together seamlessly with a standout performance from French singer Lucky Love. The Paralympic Committee president said he hoped the Games would launch an inclusion revolution beyond sports. The ceremony ended with the relighting of the iconic cauldron in the Tuileries Gardens that is back to taking its nightly hot air balloon ride over the city. And the Paralympic flame also made an appearance at this year's commemorations for the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Paris. The ceremony and military parade took place in the south of the city, where the first Allied soldiers actually entered Paris on the night of August 24th, 1944. The little-known group of fighters was from the 9th Company, known as La Nueve, because the majority of them were Spanish. Andrew Knapp, I want to come back to you. You are somewhat of a specialist in French history. What was on your mind as you watched this year's commemorations?
Well, it was indeed. You referred to a moment of unity for the French during the Olympic and Paralympic Games. And there's certainly a terrific moment of unity in that parade down the Champs-Élysées on the 26th of August, 1944. Charles de Gaulle, the founder of the current Fifth Republic, but very much at the head of that parade. But there's a terrific sense of joy if you watch any of the footage of that moment. And de Gaulle himself, in his memoirs, said France had really come together. France's heart was beating as one. The comparison is also interesting because, of course, it was actually a lot more complicated than that. De Gaulle's relations with his British and American allies were at times very, very tense, but also de Gaulle's relationship with the internal French resistance, in which the communists were very, very strong, was also quite tense. And at the end of August, de Gaulle very abruptly told the resistance leaders, right, your job's over. You can now go back to your civilian employment, or you can sign up and join the regular army. And one of them said afterwards, I've seen ingratitude in my time, but that really took the biscuit. So there's a lot going on there that wasn't obvious on the surface of 26th August. What de Gaulle was doing around now, 80 years ago, interestingly, among other things, was lunching with literary figures. It's interesting that he viewed the rebuilding of France's hard power, of France's armed forces, as very, very important. But he also always had a line on soft power. He was interested, genuinely interested in French culture, and saw it as a way to regain France's standing in the world.
Well, given his interest in soft power, he would have loved the fact that Paris is hosting the Paralympics and the Olympics. Andrew Knapp, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you again so much for joining us. That is it for A Week in France. That was Andrew Knapp joining us there, Emeritus Professor of French Politics and Contemporary History at the University of Reading. It's been a pleasure. Thanks to all of you for watching. There is more news coming up on France 24 in just a moment.